I have been the janitor at St. Thomas State School for almost 20 years. I arrived here as a young man, without many expectations, without a clear life plan. I just needed a stable job, something that would pay the bills and allow me to live without much worry. The school offered me that, and over the years, it became more than just a job. It became a home. St. Thomas is an old building, constructed in the 1950s, with long corridors and tall windows that creak at the slightest breeze. The walls bear marks of time, some discreet cracks that no one bothers to fix. Students come and go. Entire generations have passed through these rooms, while I've remained here, sweeping the same floors, locking the same doors, listening to the same whispers of silence at night when the school finally rests. I've always liked the night shift. There's something special about walking through the empty hallways, smelling the old wood and the dust that accumulates in the corners. The world outside feels distant, as if the school exists in a separate universe, suspended in time. My job is simple: make sure everything is clean, that the lights are turned off, and that no one has been left behind after hours. It's a quiet, solitary routine, but comforting. I know every inch of this building, every hinge that creaks, every light bulb that flickers and insists on failing even after being replaced. But there's something that's always been present in these hallways, something that doesn't belong to the building, but inhabits it just as much as I do. A song. I can't say exactly when it was composed or where it comes from. It's simply here, floating in the air on the quietest nights. I first heard it on my first day of work, almost 2 decades ago. I was finishing up cleaning the auditorium when I heard the soft notes of a piano. The melody was slow, melancholic, but strangely familiar, as if it were part of the very structure of the school. The next morning, I mentioned the occurrence to the former janitor, a man named Arnold, who was retiring and training me to take over. He became serious when he heard my question. He stopped sweeping for a moment, leaned on the broom, and looked around as if checking if we were alone. "You heard the music?" he asked in a tone that gave me chills. I nodded. Arnold sighed and went back to work without looking at me. "Then you know," he said, "but never try to find out where it comes from." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of farewell joke, but he didn't smile. He just kept cleaning, and after that, he avoided talking about it. At the end of the week, he handed me the keys, wished me luck, and left. The music, however, remained. Every night, at some point between midnight and 3 in the morning, it starts playing. It's never abrupt. The notes emerge gradually, as if being played by someone very careful, almost hesitant. It's not loud or intrusive. On the contrary, it's soft, floating through the air like a musical whisper. At first, I tried to ignore it, following Arnold's advice, but after so many years, it became part of the routine. Just like the flickering lights and the creaking doors, the melody is part of the school. I just accepted its existence. I've tried to track down the source of the sound a few times, more out of curiosity than necessity. I've walked through the hallways in silence, trying to follow the notes, but they seem to move, changing direction as I get closer. Some nights, it seems to come from the auditorium, other nights from the upper floor. On certain nights, I swear the music comes from the very floor, vibrating softly beneath my feet. I never found anything. I never saw anyone. There was never a piano in the school. The teachers and students don't talk about it. Maybe they've never heard it. Maybe the melody is a secret only those who spend enough time at St. Thomas can perceive. I'm not sure, but I've asked casually some of the older staff members, and I always receive strange looks in response. Some laughed and said it's all in my head. Others just frowned and looked at me as if I were crazy. The only one who confirmed hearing something was the history teacher, Arthur, a man with gray hair and few words. "The music? Oh yes, I heard it once," he said, as we drank coffee in the staff room after hours. "Do you know where it comes from?" I asked. He shrugged, stirring his spoon absent-mindedly. "It's probably some student playing a prank on you." I told him my story, how I've been hearing it every night since I started here, and he looked perplexed, clearly intrigued. "This is something worth investigating," he said. "I'll stay with you tonight and see where this melody is coming from," he added. I hesitated. "Maybe it's not a good idea," I said. Professor Arthur just ignored me and said it would be good because he'd keep me company in the end. I reluctantly accepted his suggestion, but there was no stopping him. He stayed with me during my shift. We talked a lot, and he even helped me with some simple tasks, and then the music began. Arthur immediately went after the melody. "Aren't you coming with me?" he asked. "No, I think it's better if I don't," I replied. "Well, you're the one missing out," he retorted. As the minutes passed, I could hear Arthur calling out through the school hallways, shouting things like, "Is anyone here?" and "Don't be afraid, I just want to meet you." Then the shouting stopped, and Arthur went silent. At that moment, I didn't know what to feel. It was a mix of fear, desperation, and curiosity, but I didn't go after him. Arthur was found dead the next day in his apartment, with no apparent cause, just dead. I don't know what he saw or heard, but it was definitely connected to the music. From that day on, I decided I would never speak of the music again. And so the years went by. The music continues, and I go on with my work, locking doors, turning off lights, ignoring the soft notes that echo through the early morning. In the past few months, however, I started to notice something different. The melody, once so ethereal and distant, now seemed closer. I can't say exactly when this started, but there was a moment when I realized the notes were no longer coming from the far end of the hallway or the auditorium, but from places I had just passed, as if someone were following my steps, playing only when I wasn't looking. It was a subtle change, almost imperceptible at first. Small variations in the melody, prolonged notes that weren't there before, soft touches that seemed hesitant, as if whoever was playing was trying to get my attention. And then the noises started between the notes. The first time I noticed, I was finishing closing the science lab door. As usual, the melody floated through the air, slow, almost a whisper. But for a brief moment between one note and the next, I heard a dry, muffled sound. A click, like a key being pressed too hard. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, listening carefully. The sound didn't repeat, but the melody hesitated for a few seconds before continuing. The next night, I heard it again and again. Dry clicks, sometimes accompanied by a low creaking, almost like wood moving. I know every sound this building makes. I know which doors creak, which windows vibrate with the wind, which floors crack underfoot. But those sounds were new, and they were becoming more frequent. I tried to ignore it, as I always had, but an unease grew inside me. It was as if something was changing in the very essence of the music, as if it wasn't just being played, but trying to communicate. Then, a few nights ago, something happened that made me rethink everything. I was in the auditorium, checking the chairs and turning off the lights. It was one of the last places I passed before finishing my shift. The music had already started, soft as always, but now I could anticipate the small noises between the notes. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew they were there. Then, as I walked across the stage to check the curtains, I heard something that made me stop instantly. A different sound. A sound that didn't belong to the melody. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, reverberating through the wooden floor of the auditorium. My heart raced. I turned immediately, my eyes scanning the empty rows of chairs. Nothing. The auditorium was deserted. But the footsteps continued. They were slow, as if whoever it was walking leisurely, gliding through the space between the notes of the melody. The music didn't stop. It only adjusted, as if making room for that sound to fit in. My body tensed, cold sweat trickling down my neck. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. For almost 20 years, I ignored this music. I accepted its presence as part of the school. But now, something inside me told me I shouldn't be there. That this wasn't just a sound, that something else was happening. The footsteps continued for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. And then, for the first time, I heard a breath, low, dragging, coming from somewhere nearby. I swallowed hard, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Something was there, something I had never felt before. I stood still, waiting for any other sound, but everything remained silent. Gradually, I backed away toward the exit of the auditorium, my cautious footsteps echoing in the empty space. I left without looking back, without even finishing turning off the lights. I closed the door with trembling hands. Still catching my breath, I leaned my back against the closed auditorium door, trying to understand what had just happened. The school had never been so silent. The echo of my own thoughts seemed to fill the empty hallway. But then a new sound broke the silence. Footsteps, This time they weren't coming from the auditorium, but from the end of the hall. Quick, firm, but hesitant. My heart raced again. I held my breath, waiting, and then I saw a silhouette emerge from the shadows. It was the principal. The shock made me exhale all at once. He looked just as alarmed as I did, his eyes sweeping the hallway before landing on me. He wore a dark overcoat over his formal clothes, as if he had been there longer than he should have. Something in his gaze made me realize he wasn't just passing by. "Did you hear it too?" he asked, his voice low, almost breathless. I nodded slowly. It was the first time in 20 years that someone had asked me that question. The principal ran a hand over his face, as if processing something important. Then he looked at the auditorium doors, hesitating. I was investigating," he confessed, his tone heavy. "This melody, I've been hearing it since I took the position here." My eyebrows shot up. He knew about the music? "Since when?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The principal looked away for a moment. "Since my first day," he admitted. "And every night I stayed late, it came back. I tried to ignore it, like everyone does. But recently, it's been changing." His words echoed in my mind. Changing, he had noticed it too. "What have you discovered?" I asked, taking a step closer. He hesitated. His eyes scanned the corridors, as if he was sure we were alone. Then he whispered, "That the music doesn't come from one fixed place." I fell silent, absorbing that information. He continued, "I've tried to follow it many times. It always seems to be one hallway away, behind a door, sometimes upstairs. But I never managed to find it." He paused, looking at me with intensity. "And in the last few weeks, it started following me." A shiver ran down my spine. It was the same thing I had noticed. The principal looked back as if expecting something to emerge from the dark hallway. "If we keep ignoring it, it will get worse," he murmured. "We have to find out who or what is playing this music." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to leave and pretend this conversation had never happened, but another part knew that after tonight, I could never ignore that melody in the same way again. I looked at the principal, at his tired but determined gaze, and then, slowly, I nodded. "Where do we start?" The principal took a deep breath and nodded, as if he already had a plan. We walked together down the dark hallway, each step echoing on the polished floor. He led me to the old archives room, a dusty and cramped space in the basement of the school. He opened a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder filled with aged documents. "Here," he said, opening a yellowed page. "There was a music teacher, decades ago. He disappeared inside the school." My stomach churned. The attached photos showed a music room very similar to the current one, but something in the details seemed off. Then I saw a scribbled note in the bottom corner of the page. The music never stopped. At that moment, a sound reverberated through the basement. The melody started playing again, but this time it was here, too close. The principal and I exchanged uneasy glances. Then the door to the room slammed shut. The sound of keys being pressed hard filled the room, followed by a deep creak like wood being dragged. My chest tightened. The melody, now more intense, seemed to want to swallow us. "We need to get out of here," the principal said, trying to open the door. Locked. The lights began to flicker. Something moved in the reflection of the dirty window, a silhouette sitting at an invisible piano. And then the music stopped abruptly. The silence was overwhelming. The door opened by itself. We ran down the hallway, not looking back. That night we left the school with a terrible certainty. The music wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. And someone or something wanted to be heard. Someone or something that wanted another victim. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more.